Hello and welcome to part 2 in a series of videos that I'm putting out this week, where I break down all the fights taking place this weekend at UFC on ESPN, plus 10 from a betting perspective. Now I've already covered 3 fights on this card, which you can check out in part 1 of this video. I will leave a link to that in the description below, and I recommend checking that out if you haven't already, because I do talk about the main event fight between Kevin Lee and Rafael dos Anjos in part 1. Now I'll be going through another 3 fights in today's video, but before we get into it, I just want to talk a little bit about how strange this card is. So I've been a professional gambler betting on MMA for around 4 years now, and I've been using my current method of research for around about 6 or 7 years. You know, over the years there have been a lot of tweaks to it, but generally speaking, my process, you know, the roadmap that I use for researching fights is roughly the same. And I can't remember the last time that I was able to research a UFC event this fast. In fact, this might be the fastest I have ever researched a UFC event. It is currently Wednesday, and usually it takes me 4 or 5 days of solid research, 8 to 10 hours a day, to complete my research on a full UFC event. But it's Wednesday and I'm already done on this card. And the reason why this card is very different to others is because of how many heavy favourites we've got on it. If you go through the fights, we can see we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 big favourites on a card that only consists of 12 fights. So in order to find any bets on a card like this, you know, you've really just got the 4 competitive matchups to pick from. And if you don't find anything in those 4 competitive matchups, you either have to find 2 or 3 of the heavy favourites that are very safe bets that you can put into a 2 or 3 leg parlay accumulator, or you've got to find one of these underdogs to have a real legit path to victory and find value in one of these underdogs. So it's a tricky card to call. It's a tricky card to bet on. I have put just as much time and effort into researching this event as I would any other, because obviously I earn the vast majority of my money from live betting, so I'm going to be obviously needing to study how these fighters behave in every different scenario that their opponent could throw at them. But at the same time, due to how many clear-cut matchups we've got here, how many of these fights are very easy to cap due to one fighter holding massive advantages over their opponent, I mean, there's really not much time to be spent researching many of these matchups, and for that reason, these videos this week are probably going to be shorter than usual as well. Now, before we get into the first fight, I just want to remind you all that this weekend we've got a big KSW event, KSW 49. Scott Askham is fighting Michael Materla. Should be a great fight. Very excited for that. And because the event starts at around 6 PM UK time, I won't be able to do a live stream this weekend on Saturday. But if every single video that I put out this week gets 250 likes, I will do a live stream on Friday night. So I'm trying to figure out what time would be best for people all over the world in a wide range of time zones. So I know Friday's not the best because some people will be working, but like I say, I'm not going to be able to do it Saturday because I will be live betting KSW. So what I would say is, if we do it around about 11 PM on Friday, that is probably the best time zone for the majority of people, because 11 PM Friday would mean it's not too late for people in Europe. You know, it is late at night, but it's not crazy late, and you're probably staying up late on Friday anyway if you're trying to adjust your sleep cycle to be fresh as a daisy for live betting UFC on Saturday night. That's going to be early evening for people in the United States and most parts of South America, and it will be the morning for people in Australia and Asia. So that is not ideal to do a live stream on a Friday, but it's better than nothing. So if you want me to do that live stream, hit the like button below, and if every video that I put out this week, all 4 parts, if they all get 250 likes each, I will do that live stream where I will answer all your questions about this week's upcoming cards, as well as anything else you want to ask me. And I will also be digging for a decent value prop bet for every single fight that takes place this weekend on UFC on ESPN plus 10, and a prop bet, if you don't know, is a highly specific bet. For example, Lee to win by decision would be considered a prop bet, although that is not a bet I would recommend. That is just an example. So now let's get into the first fight that I want to talk about in today's video, which is ticking one of the heavy favourites off the list, which is Julio Arce against Julian Erosa. Now, here we've got two kickboxers going up against each other, which means this fight should stay standing. I would be very surprised if either of these guys look to take this fight to the ground. Now, Julian Erosa has a very big size advantage in this fight. He's 6 foot tall with a 74.5-inch reach, and he should tower over Julio Arce, who is only 5'7", but as you can see, he will also have a 4.5-inch reach. However, the size difference and the size advantage for Erosa is really the only advantage that he has in this matchup, and that is the reason why Julio Arce is such a big favourite. So if we look at the odds at the moment, the average odds available on Arce at the moment are around about 1.16, which is minus 625 for an implied probability of 86%. So in order to get any value here at all, you have to give Arce a 91% better chance of winning, which I can't do personally, just because with this being MMA, you know, Arce, he might have a bad weight cut, he might be carrying an injury, he might throw a leg kick and catch his toe on the knee of Erosa and get a compound fracture in his foot. He might break his leg throwing a leg kick, he might break his hand, he might get flash KO'd. Who knows? There's a bunch of ways that a fighter can lose. So to cap any fighter at 91% is a bit of a risk. There's absolutely no value in the odds on Arce at all. And if we look at the odds on Julian Erosa, currently around about an average of 5.75, which is plus 475. For an implied probability of 18 or 17%, and I'm personally not interested in betting Erosa either, just because, like I say, Julio Arce is significantly better than him everywhere, in every single aspect of MMA. So Julian Erosa has no legitimate path to victory. He's not better than Arce anywhere. Yes, he has a size advantage, but in terms of technique, they're both kickboxers, and Arce's striking is at a much higher level. Also, Julian Erosa has really bad striking defense, and at times he can be quite tentative and passive and not really let his hands go. So I do expect Arce to put on a striking clinic here and dominate and win easily. The only real weapon that Erosa brings to the table which could trouble Arce would be that Erosa has a very, very nasty head kick. His head kicks do carry vicious KO power, and with him standing at 6 foot tall and Arce being much shorter than him at 5'7", obviously it is going to be much easier for Erosa to land a head kick on a shorter opponent. However, Arce is a very high level striker, excellent technical kickboxer, your typical Tiger Schulman type fighter who's very well rounded, very technical, great striking defense, great cardio, great chin. He's the whole package. He's got it all. He should dominate. That's why he's a big favourite. It is an easy pass. Absolute no-brainer pass. So now we move on to the next fight that I want to talk about, which is Zach Cummings against Trevin Giles. Now, Zach Cummings used to be a pretty good fighter. As you can see, he's got a very decent record of 22-6. But for whatever reason, just hasn't looked good over the last few years. Cummings has been on quite a steep decline. Now, I don't know what the reason for that is for, because when USADA came into effect, his 2 or 3 fights following the implementation of USADA were probably his 2 or 3 best performances of his career. And also, at 34 years old, I know he's had a lot of fights, but not that old. You wouldn't expect him to be declining as badly as he is at this stage in his career. If you go back and watch his performances against Nicholas Dalby, Alexander Yakovlev, and in particular Santiago Ponzinibbio, what's ironic about Cummings' career is, even though he lost to Santiago Ponzinibbio, I actually think this performance here was the best of his career. If you go back and watch him in these matchups, it's like looking at a completely different person compared to the guy that fought against Trevor Smith and Michel Prazeres. So I don't know what's going to what has happened to Cummings. I mean, these fights took place within a 7-month span of each other, so it's possible that maybe he's just been dealing with some financial issues or some personal issues or some recurring injuries that may be having an impact on his performance. But two completely different versions of Zach Cummings from what we saw from him in 2016 compared to what we saw from him in 2017. You know, if you go back and watch these fights here, he looks, you know, aggressive, strong, powerful, athletic, fast. Never been the most technical, but kind of like a just a better version of what we see from Brian Barberena now. Can stay in your face, great chin, very aggressive. Whereas if you go back and watch his last two fights, he's looked flat, sloppy, slow, not that athletic, quite predictable. So I don't know what's going on with him. So capping this fight is very difficult because in the last 3 years we've seen two completely different versions of Zach Cummings. So how you would set a probability on this fight and cap this fight really depends on what version of Cummings shows up, and that's obviously very difficult to do, because if the version of Cummings that fought Santiago Ponzinibbio shows up, I'd cap Cummings as the favourite in this matchup. But if the Zach Cummings that fought Michel Prazeres shows up, you know, he should definitely be the underdog, which he is at the moment. And bear in mind that because these two fights, you know, were quite recently, Prazeres was a year ago, Trevor Smith was, you know, 6 months ago, back in December, it's more likely that Cummings is going to look how he did in these two fights as opposed to how he did way back in 2016. So just bear that in mind. We can't rule out the possibility that Cummings will have got his career back on track and go back to looking how he did back in 2016. But based on all the information we've got available to us, it's more likely that he looks slow and flat and sloppy and not technical like he did against Smith and Prazeres. And that's significant because there have been two very different sides of Cummings we've seen over the last few years. So if this fight stays standing, based on Cummings' performances in these matchups, I think it would be very close. Based on Cummings' performances in these matchups, I think Trevin Giles would dominate if it stayed standing. But Trevin Giles' Achilles heel is his takedown defense. I mean, his takedown defense isn't completely terrible, but it's not great either. And what I would say is if you can put Giles on his back, he is very weak off his back. He finds it difficult to work his way back to his feet, and he just doesn't really offer anything on his back. It's quite easy to rack up a good few minutes of top control if you can take him down. And Zach Cummings is quite a strong wrestler, but the frustrating thing about Zach Cummings is that he's one of these really frustrating guys that doesn't always take the easiest path to victory. So we know going into this matchup that if Cummings is able to take Giles down and just rack up a few minutes of top control in each round, there's a good chance he's going to win this fight. And he absolutely does have the offensive wrestling to take Trevin Giles down and control him. But the problem is he's one of these really frustrating guys that doesn't always take the path of least resistance, doesn't always make life easy for himself, even though we know his path to victory in this fight is using his wrestling, or the easiest path to victory for him is using his wrestling. He's the kind of guy that might go a whole round without shooting a takedown. Very similar to what we saw from Eric Anders against Khalil Roundtree. You know, everyone was quick to praise how great Khalil Roundtree looked when they fought a few weeks ago, but they completely ignored the fact that Eric Anders gifted the win to Roundtree on a plate, because in 15 minutes Anders didn't shoot a single takedown attempt, and Khalil Roundtree has very suspect takedown defense. Zach Cummings fits into that Eric Anders type box, where even though he's got strong offensive wrestling, a heavy top game, and a high level ground game as well, he trained with Tyron Woodley for a long time, just doesn't use it often enough, so you just can't trust him. So if this fight stays standing, like I say, Trevin Giles has got good technical boxing, fights very long, hits hard. He should get the edge standing, even if Cummings shows up and performs like he did back against Ponzinibbio, which was, in my opinion, the best performance of his career. Giles probably still edges it, although, like I say, Zach Cummings is the Brian Barberena type guy when he's at his best. Very aggressive, will walk you down, get in your face, and a young, inexperienced 26-year-old fighter with only 11 pro fights, generally speaking against a low level of opponent, hasn't ever dealt with someone that can bring that kind of forward pressure to the table and really test his cardio, his composure, and ability to fight backwards. So in a nutshell, this fight is an easy pass for betting, because we just don't know what version of Zach Cummings is going to show up, and we can't trust Zach Cummings to fight smart and try and take this fight to the ground, which is his easiest path to victory. So if we look at the current odds, I mean, we can just take a quick look. Average odds on Trevin Giles are currently around about 1.67, which is minus 149 for an implied probability of 60%. And there's no way I can bet Trevin Giles here, because in order to get any value, you'd have to cap him at 65 to 75%, and I just can't get there. For a young, inexperienced guy, if Zach Cummings has turned his career around, shows up like he did back in 2016, he should beat Giles. But if we look at the odds on Zach Cummings, currently around about an average of 2.30, which is plus 130 for an implied probability of 43%. I'm not interested in betting Zach Cummings either, simply because I don't trust him to fight smart, and I don't trust him to have turned his career around. And I think if he shows up looking like he did against Prazeres and Trevor Smith, he's really going to struggle. So now we move on to the next fight, the final fight that I want to talk about. And when I first scanned through this fight, scanned through the card, this was one of the few fights that jumped out at me as a potential betting opportunity, because as you can see, it is one of the few fights on the card, one of only 4 fights which has got relatively balanced odds. So Megan Anderson is taking on Felicia Spencer, who is making her UFC debut, although worth noting that this is a legitimately scheduled fight, so Spencer's not taking this fight on short notice. And yesterday I talked about the Rafael Dos Anjos versus Kevin Lee matchup being an impossible fight to bet on, an impossible fight to predict, because there's so many variables that we don't have, so many variables and so many unanswered questions that we don't have the answers to yet. And this fight definitely fits into that box. This is another very, very difficult fight for betting, because both girls have massive weaknesses that their opponent can exploit, and we won't know which girl's going to come out on top just because either girl on any given night can win. Like I say, both girls have massive weaknesses. So if we start off, let's talk a little bit about Megan Anderson's weaknesses. So I've said many times that a long wingspan, a tall fighter with a long wingspan, is the perfect body type for MMA. And as you can see, Megan Anderson is absolutely huge, and I mean that with the greatest of respect. Not being a dick or anything, Megan Anderson is a beautiful girl, but in terms of her body type, she is abnormally big for a female fighter, which is a huge strength, because she has a very, very long wingspan, and that is absolutely brilliant. Her wingspan means that she physically has the physical gifts to literally become one of the greatest female fighters of all time. In fact, in memory, I cannot remember another female fighter who has a wingspan as favourable as what Megan Anderson has. But unfortunately, you hear me talk about this a lot. And when you have an abnormally tall fighter for their division, they are usually plagued by bad takedown defense. And we can think of examples of like Stefan Struve, Curtis Melender. These are fighters abnormally tall for their weight class who have absolutely terrible takedown defense. A strong gust of wind would be enough to take them down. And what you occasionally get in MMA is an outlier who has this kind of optimal wingspan with the takedown defense to go with it. So if we think about an Israel Adesanya or a John Jones, they are these unicorns that are tall, long fighters with a perfect wingspan for MMA, and they're also very difficult to take down and very difficult to hold down. Unfortunately, Megan Anderson doesn't have that gift, and her major weakness throughout her career has been her takedown defense and ground game. In fact, I really do compare her to Curtis Melender in many ways, because her striking is very, very good, very technical, hits very hard. She is a nightmare for anyone in the world when it comes to strike. We saw how much trouble she put Holly Holm in her UFC debut. She basically turned Holly Holm into a panic wrestler, which no one else has really been able to do. But unfortunately, like I say, she is abnormally tall for the division, and she is cursed by bad takedown defense. Now, similarly to Curtis Melender, Megan Anderson actually does a really good job of stuffing the initial takedown. She does everything right. She tries to get underhooks in play early. She can't get underhooks. She tries to create a wide base and go to the overhook takedown defense method. And she does a really, really good job of stuffing the initial takedown. But then, also like Melender, if you then chain that initial takedown attempt into a different kind of takedown, so for example, if you shoot a single leg and Megan Anderson does a great job of stepping it, and then you transition to a body lock takedown and take her back and throw her to the ground that way. For whatever reason, she just can't think fast enough to then transition into defending the second takedown attempt, the chained takedown attempt. And if you do chain your takedowns together, it is quite easy to put Megan Anderson on the ground, which is a big shame. But also, at this point, it is worth knowing that Megan Anderson is obviously a very, very intelligent woman. She has reached the highest level of the sport for a reason. She's obviously great at learning from her mistakes and tightening up her weaknesses and improving. She's only 29 years old. She now has 2 UFC fights under her belt, and she's not going to be stupid. She knows that her weakness is going to be her takedown defense. So I'm sure she's training in the gym every day to tighten this up. And one day in the not too distant future, I expect Megan Anderson to show up with bulletproof takedown defense, because she absolutely is almost there. She's almost there. She back in Invicta, her takedown defense was total shit. I didn't have anything good to say about her takedown defense at all. It was very, very bad. Go back and watch her fight against Cindy Dandois from back in 2015 to see what I mean. But then you could see massive improvements in her takedown defense against Holly Holm in 2018. So she is making these huge improvements, but not enough yet to feel confident in betting on her against any kind of fighter with any level of offensive wrestling. And I am sure there's a very good chance Megan Anderson may show up with a completely new set of skills and turn Felicia Spencer into a panic wrestler and dominate this fight. But until I see it, I'm not going to bet on it. Now, this fight is a tricky fight to call, because this size advantage for Megan Anderson is both a strength and a weakness in a matchup like this. Because at 6 foot tall, she should absolutely tower over Felicia Spencer, who's only 5'6". But in matchups like this can work against you. So generally speaking, the longer the wingspan, the bigger the advantage. But like I've said, being abnormally tall for the division does also have, for some fighters, its drawbacks. And in Megan Anderson's case, bad takedown defense. Now, another area where this size difference could get into trouble is if Megan Anderson can keep this fight in striking range, this size advantage becomes a huge advantage for her, because she can use her length to keep Felicia Spencer on the outside and land on Spencer from positions where Spencer can't counter, because she's got a much longer reach, does a really good job of fighting long. And Felicia Spencer is a very, very low level striker, very bad striking defense, very predictable, very sloppy. If this fight stays standing, Anderson will put on a clinic. Spencer has nothing for Anderson standing at all. But the size difference here can become a disadvantage when we look at Felicia Spencer being so much shorter, which makes it easier for a shorter fighter to shoot deep on a taller fighter's hips and upset their balance. If you think about a skyscraper, if you want to knock a skyscraper down, you look at like the demolitions, you want to hit them, not at the top, not right at the bottom. You want to get in just about 25 to 30% up from the ground, which is where a fighter's legs are. That's where you want to shoot these double leg takedowns. And being much shorter than Anderson makes it much easier for a shorter fighter to shoot in deep on the hips. Standing up, it's a huge disadvantage for Felicia Spencer, but getting takedowns might prove to be an advantage. Now, there is a little asterisk next to that, because if Megan Anderson has been working on her takedown defense and she's worked really hard on creating a wide base against the cage and getting underhooks in play early, then again the size difference will help her. Because in order to complete a double leg takedown, remember, you've got to connect your hands around your opponent's body. And if you're fighting a larger opponent, obviously they're going to be able to create a wider base because their legs are longer. And Felicia Spencer's arms aren't going to be that long, so she may not be able to get her arms around Megan Anderson's body and connect them together to complete the double leg takedown, especially if Anderson's been working really hard on getting underhooks in play early and preventing Spencer from completing the grip. So like I say, there's lots of things to consider in this matchup, and because there are lots of things to consider, we don't know if Spencer will be able to get this fight to the ground, because like I say, Anderson would only have to tighten up a few things to have real bulletproof takedown defense, which would easily be able to turn Spencer into a panic wrestler, because Spencer's got nothing for her standing. Now, the problem is Spencer is very tough, she is very tenacious, and she is absolutely relentless, and she is just aggressive at pursuing the takedown. Not particularly technical, not the best offensive wrestler, but she goes hard for it, the complete opposite of Zach Cummings. I just spoke a few moments ago about how Cummings is frustrating because even though he's a good offensive wrestler with a heavy top game and a high level ground game, for whatever reason he doesn't often shoot takedowns, whereas Spencer will absolutely spam takedowns to get a fight to the ground, which gives her a legitimate path to victory over Megan Anderson. Now, when on her back, Anderson, and the reason why I like to compare Anderson to Melenda is because just like Melenda, when Anderson is on her back, she has absolutely no idea how to work her way back to her feet. She has a very low level ground game, it's easy to pass her guard, and she just doesn't know how to get back up. So the problem with betting on a fight like this is, if Spencer can get Anderson down, she should easily be able to rack up 3 or 4 minutes of top control just because of how hopeless Anderson is off her back. Now, the only thing that might save Anderson in this fight is that Spencer sometimes makes critical mistakes. So she does have a heavy top game, and if she fought smart and got this fight to the ground and just focused on maintaining top position, she can definitely win this fight. But one thing that costs her is that she is one of these frustrating fighters that occasionally does just pursue long shot submissions that she doesn't really have that much of a chance of getting. So she loves to go for a rear naked choke. She's got, quite a few wins by rear naked choke on her record, but unfortunately this does occasionally get her into trouble because she is quite short for a featherweight at 5'6", which means her legs aren't that long, which means when she goes for a rear naked choke, she isn't able to get deep hooks in play simply because her legs aren't long enough to get deep hooks in play, which means when she does try and take her opponents back, she does quite often give up position and give her opponents an opportunity to create a scramble and get out of back control or explode into top position or explode back to their feet. So that is a big weakness of Spencer. She just goes after the rear naked choke in situations where she should just be focusing on maintaining top position. But again, she's a very intelligent woman. She is going to know that her path to victory in this fight is on the ground, and maybe she'll come in and fight smart and won't try and take Anderson's back, because she'll know she should just be able to ride out Anderson from top position and take an easy decision win. So that is pretty much everything that I want to say about this fight. I think it's an easy pass for me, guys. Again, just like the Rafael dos Anjos versus Kevin Lee fight, there's just too many unanswered questions to make a bet on this fight. It is an easy pass. If we look at the current average odds on Megan Anderson are around about 1.63, which gives her an implied probability of 61%. Money line odds are minus 159. There's no way I can bet Anderson at these odds, because to get any value, you'd have to give her a 66 to 67% better chance of winning, which you just can't do because, like I say, she's at such a low level on the ground. You can't cap her at those odds against pretty much any fighter in the UFC's bantamweight division, because she is so easy to take down and she is at such a low level on the ground. But then if we look at the odds on Felicia Spencer, currently around about an average of 2.35, which is plus 135 for an implied probability of 43%. Again, cannot bet her because, like I say, Megan Anderson's initial takedown defense is very good, and if she has tightened up some weaknesses for this fight, shows up with a completely new set of skills, she can keep this fight standing, turn Spencer into a panic wrestler and dominate easily. And if you want to see how fast the fighter can develop rock solid takedown defense, I recommend, let's just take a look. I can give you a very good example of this. So if we look at Kutalaba's Tapology page, so if you go and watch some of Ion Kutalaba's past fights, you will see how fast the fighter can develop rock solid takedown defense. So if you go back and watch Kutalaba's fights against Misha Serkinov, Jared Cannonier and Gadzimurad Antigulov, you will see that Ion Cutelaba had absolutely no takedown defense in those fights. Whereas if you go and watch his fight against Glover Teixeira from just last month, you will see in round 1 of this fight, Ion Cutelaba's takedown defense looked absolutely incredible. So fighters can improve their takedown defense very, very quickly. Megan Anderson's an intelligent fighter. She's going to be working hard on it. And if she shows up having made big improvements to her takedown defense for this fight, she can absolutely dominate Spencer. But I wouldn't bet on that, especially at favourite odds. So what I also want to say before we wrap this video up, guys, that's all the fights that I want to talk about. Is when you see line movement on cards like this. So we're seeing line movement on Rafael Dos Anjos. We're seeing Dos Anjos' odds decline. If we look at line movement on the Megan Anderson versus Felicia Spencer fight, we are seeing Megan's odds decline. We are seeing on this competitive fight, we're seeing Ian Heinisch's odds improve. Well, that's not true. Actually, sorry, they're declining. I meant to say Shoeface's odds are improving. And we are seeing Grant Dawson's odds decline. What I would say about fights like this is, if these fights were taking place on last week's card, UFC 237, people wouldn't even give any thought to them. They would just pass on them. They wouldn't be interested. But because this card doesn't have many betting opportunities, you'll see people overanalyze fights like Dos Anjos versus Lee and Spencer versus Anderson and Dawson versus Trizano, because they need to get that dopamine hit. They want to place bets. They feel compelled to place bets. They have to place bets to get that adrenaline rush and make the fights more interesting. And that's a really dangerous road to go down, because if you've been following my betting advice since I started this channel around about 3 months ago, you have absolutely crushed it. Our record since I set this channel up is incredible. We have absolutely smashed it since 2019. Now, I understand that these videos are boring when I'm telling you to pass all the time, but there is a saying we have in poker, and the saying is you've got to know when to hold them and you've got to know when to fold them. You know, it is really important that you don't put your money in harm's way. It has really surprised me how many people were annoyed at me on the last card because they lost money betting on my picks, which is really confusing. People that lost money betting on Anderson Silva, and it makes no sense to me, because if I felt confident in these picks, I would bet them myself. I didn't bet Anderson Silva. I didn't lose a penny on Anderson Silva because he wasn't a good bet. So it's really important on events like this where there are no good opportunities to just pass and live the fight another day. You know, we've made so much money in 2019. Why take good money and good profits that you've earned and put them in harm's way betting on marginal positions? You know, making money in this game, I always say, is not about being right or wrong. It's not about being the smartest guy at the barbecue. To make money in this game, all you need to do is consistently put your money in strong positions. And if there is no strong position, don't try and find one. Unless a strong position jumps out at you, don't try and find one. If a strong position doesn't jump out at you, it's not there. You know, I said it last week. Usually, within 30 minutes to an hour of researching a fight, I can tell if there's a golden opportunity there or not. And if my research goes past 30 minutes to 1 hour, it's usually best to pass. So just bear that in mind, guys. Don't be tempted to risk good money, good profits we've earned this year on a card like this, where I can tell you, I know that everyone wants to debate fights and everyone wants to try and be right and wrong, but I do this for a living, and I will look you dead in the eye and tell you that there just are no strong opportunities to bet this card. I mean, look, guys, who's betting Megan Anderson as a favourite? Like, who would do that? Who would bet her? No one knows how this fight's going to play out. I accept Felicia Spencer isn't great. She does slow down as the fight progresses. Her striking defense is non-existent. She's a low-level striker. Anderson has a big size advantage. I'm not disputing any of these things. But how can you bet Anderson when her takedown defense and ground game historically has looked so bad? How can you bet on Rafael Dos Anjos when Kevin Lee has one of the best deep double-leg takedown entries in the UFC? Perhaps the history of the UFC, with how tight he gets to his opponent on the deep double leg shot. How can you bet on Kevin Lee knowing how bad his cardio is? And knowing that he doesn't have the cardio to grind on Rafael dos Anjos like Colby Covington and Kamaru Usman did. So bear these things in mind, guys. Don't be tempted to place bad bets. And if we don't have any bets for this card, then who cares? Because if you look at the schedule, I'll bring it up. If you look at the upcoming schedule, the rest of the year is absolutely stacked. We've got 4 events in June, 4 events in July, 4 events in August, 4 events in September, 4 events in October, 3 events in November, 3 events in December. Don't potentially risk future profits on shit bets. Just don't do it, guys. Be smart. Be smart. I'm really, as well as giving you guys information on fights, I really want to help you guys develop the kind of mindset you need to crush it when it comes to betting. Because picking winners and identifying, fighters that are going to win is only 50% of the battle. Having the right mentality and the right strategy and the right discipline is the other 50%. In fact, I'd actually say this is more important than picking winners, because I make money on every sport I bet. I don't know that much about football. I don't know that much about darts. I don't know that much about boxing. But I make a profit on every single sport I bet because of the betting brain that I've developed. And I'm going to try and help as many of you as possible to develop this similar mindset. Don't be tempted to bet on guys like Grant Dawson or Mike Trizano or Danny Roberts or Megan Anderson or Kevin Lee or Rafael dos Anjos, because I do this for a living, guys, and I can tell you they're just not good bets and you'll be setting fire to your money. So with that, guys, that is it for today's video. Please don't forget to hit the like button. If every video that I put out this week gets 250 likes, I will do that bonus video on Friday night where I do a live stream and I will find a decent value prop bet for every single one of these fights take place. But until then, or until tomorrow, I will see you very soon where I'll be back with part 3.
Too many thoughts on my mind, I can't sleep at night, so I just keep writing. I don't need no help, I don't need opinions, so don't waste my time then. I just been living online, my city don't show me no love and that's fine. Fuck local radio stations, I got more plays than all of these rappers combined. I'm going again, I've been going in, I'm fed up with so many things. I gotta just let it all out, I'm talking about the shit they've been talking.